Turkey's President Erdogan ordered 20 airstrikes against the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, in northern Iraq after a suicide bomb attack in Ankara.
Populist former Prime Minister Robert Fico and his leftist Smer party win Slovakia's parliamentary elections after campaigning on a pro-Russia message.
In Poland, hundreds of thousands of opposition supporters marched through Warsaw just 2 weeks before a crucial parliamentary election. Armenians from across Europe gather in Brussels to demand sanctions against Azerbaijan after it occupied Nagorno-Karabakh.
After Sunday morning's suicide bomb attack in Ankara, retribution from Turkey was swift, with 20 airstrikes on PKK or Kurdistan Workers' Party targets in northern Iraq. A group linked to the PKK had said it was behind the bombing. Hours later in Parliament, a tough and distinctly unilateral message from Turkey's president.
Türkiye olarak 60 yıldır kapısında bekletildiğimiz Avrupa Birliği'nden herhangi bir beklentimiz yok. Şayet bize karşı örtülü bir yaptırım gibi kullandıkları vize dayatması başta olmak üzere haksızlıklarından geri dönerlerse kendi yanlışlarını düzeltmiş olurlar.
The attack in Ankara left 2 police officers injured and 2 attackers dead and prompted tight security on the Turkish capital's streets.
Populist former Prime Minister Robert Fico and his leftist Smer party have won Slovakia's parliamentary elections in what's widely seen as a victory for Vladimir Putin. After a campaign based on a pro-Russia, anti-American message, Smer led with 22.9%, the Slovak Statistics Office said on Sunday, after counting more than 99.9% of the vote. Fico's main rival, Michal Simica, whose Progressive Slovakia party was a distant second at 18%, said Fico's win is bad news for the country and would be even worse if Smer manages to form a government. The country of 5.5 million people has been a staunch supporter of Ukraine since Russia's invasion last year, donating weapons and opening its borders to refugees fleeing the war. Fico opposes EU sanctions on Russia and wants to block Ukraine from joining NATO.
Hundreds of thousands of opposition supporters marched through Warsaw on Sunday, just 2 weeks before a crucial parliamentary election. Opposition leader Donald Tusk, who was once the European Council president, is trying to get rid of the controversial nationalist government that's been eroding the rule of law. After it was found to be limiting the independence of its judges, the EU has been fining Poland €500,000 every day. The ruling Law and Justice Party has also interfered with state media to ensure it mostly promotes the government's views. And it's promoted populist policies, such as demanding Germany pay reparations for atrocities committed in World War II. Recent surveys suggest the opposition's electoral alliance is a few percentage points behind Law and Justice. But Donald Tusk says he thinks the wider opposition could defeat the ruling party and form a government, and at the start of the march he greeted leaders of the centrist Third Way party. Armenians from across Europe gathered in Brussels on Sunday to demand sanctions against Azerbaijan. Almost all of the ethnic Armenians living in Nagorno-Karabakh fled to Armenia after Azerbaijan's forces occupied the region. They feared that they wouldn't be treated humanely if they'd remained, and their way of life as Christians who speak their own language would have been threatened. On Sunday, a UN mission arrived there to assess the humanitarian needs of those who didn't or couldn't flee. The Armenian fighters who had controlled Nagorno-Karabakh for 30 years surrendered, and Azerbaijan is now in full control of the Lachin corridor that used to be the only main road connecting the region to Armenia. Also on Sunday, Azerbaijan's Prosecutor General issued an arrest warrant for the former Armenian leader of Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenian government that was in charge of the region has said it will dissolve itself by the end of the year. The Spanish city of Murcia went into 3 days of mourning on Sunday after at least 13 people died in a nightclub fire. Officials fear the number could rise as several people are still reported missing. The fire started around 6 a.m. in the Teatra nightclub and quickly spread through the venue. It's not yet clear what caused it. The police and the emergency services tried to prevent the whole building from collapsing. They're still trying to locate the victims' bodies and identify them.
Adi grew up in this house in Groningen, but because of earthquakes, it is no longer safe to live.
Ja, scheuren in de muur buiten en scheuren in de muur binnen.
The earthquakes are caused by the extraction of gas from the Groningen gas field, the largest one in Europe. Thousands of residents have struggled to get compensation.
Er is gezegd, er moet verstevigd worden. En dus daar gaan ze nou straks mee aan de gang. Daar zouden ze al heel lang mee aan de gang. Maar de procedures zijn allemaal zo lang en zo ingewikkeld en zo geldverslindend ook. Terwijl dat het geld wat eigenlijk naar de huizen moet, of naar de mensen moet, ja, dat duurt allemaal heel lang.
The field's riches laid the foundation for the Dutch welfare state.
The discovery of the Groningen gas field was really important to the Dutch economy because it enabled us to make annual revenues of about 15 billion euros in the beginning. So it was a huge contribution to the Dutch economy, and also the Dutch state had a major share in these revenues. About 80% of these revenues went to the Dutch state, to the Dutch society.
The first earthquake hit in 1986. In 2012, a 3.6 scale earthquake caused massive damage, and public sentiment started to shift. A parliamentary inquiry earlier this year found that the government had placed too much importance on gas extraction. On the 1st of October, the Groningen gas field will be closed. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte visited affected residents last Friday.
It's important because we know there is a direct link between the earthquakes and gas extraction, and luckily we are able to do without the Groningen gas field. So that's why it is crucial to close this because of the safety of people.
In case of an exceptionally cold winter, the field could be tapped one last time. Behind me you can see a gas installation that is now partially dismantled. There's many of these dotted around the Groningen countryside atop of this largest onshore gas field in Europe. Now the gas extraction will end, but the earthquakes it has caused will continue for many decades to come. This is Fernand van Tetz reporting for Euronews, Groningen.
Some countries within the borderless Schengen area are stepping up checks on their frontiers, yet one of the main principles of the Schengen Agreement is freedom of movement of citizens. There are clauses that provide for the temporary restoration of border controls, primarily when it concerns a threat to public order or internal security. And so far in 2023, at least 7 Schengen states have taken advantage of these provisions. So is the treaty working as hoped?
What we are seeing now is yet another example of the fragility of the Schengen borderless area. And this is for a number of reasons. There are political reasons that have to do with upcoming elections at the local and national level, which have put central governments under pressure. They also have to do with the additional arrivals, especially in southern European countries, and the possibility of further secondary movements to northern European countries that have seen an uptake in first-time asylum applications in recent months.
Germany calls the resumption of border checks with Poland and the Czech Republic one of the options for combating human traffickers. Slovenia is also stepping up surveillance of its border crossing with Croatia, which recently joined the Schengen area.
It is often just a matter of spot checks. Like they check some of the people that cross, but it is not really a full reintroduction of internal borders as such. It is a symbolic measure for the domestic public. And as such, probably it is not as important as some politicians would want it to be. But the Schengen system on its own is fine.
How old is too old to be a political leader? It's a popular question in the United States, where the current president is 81 next month and he wants to remain president for another 6 years. And since life expectancy in the US is just 76, it's not outlandish to question whether Joe Biden could possibly die in office if he wins a second term. US Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley, who is a mere 44, has called for so-called lucidity tests to be mandatory for politicians over 75. In Brazil, President Lula is 77, whilst Russia's Vladimir Putin is 70. Other European leaders are in their much younger 40s.
Usually in the past, prime ministers were used to enter office after accumulating a lot of experience in parliament, in the party, in the cabinet. But now we have more and more outsiders with low political experience, more technical experience, and they are young. So in this case, maybe the issue about age is the effect that can have on what prime ministers do after being in office. More and more, you have these leaders going into the private sector, and this may raise issues of accountability.
Many of the world's populations, mainly in Asia and Europe, are aging, and it's usually seen as discriminatory to prevent older people from working. So for now, it seems unlikely there'll be a mandatory retirement age for world leaders. And ultimately, in democracies at least, it is up to the voters to decide.
Team Europe produced a stunning performance to regain the Ryder Cup in Rome on Sunday. With the hosts needing 4 points from the final day's singles matches, Tommy Fleetwood won the 11th game to secure the 44th edition against the US. Europe dominated the events with strong performances by the likes of Jon Rahm, Victor Oyland and Rory McIlroy. Captain Luke Donald's strategic decisions paid off, with Europe establishing an early lead and never looking back, en route to a much-needed win 2 years after losing heavily at Whistling Straits.